Part 2 of Notes from Underground discusses the underground man's interaction with a soldier, a group of former friends, and a prostitute. And till this point, from part 1, we know that the underground man has low self-esteem, alienates himself within the confines of his apartment in Saint Petersburg, and is overly self-conscious. The traits we learn about the underground man in part 1 provide the reader with a crucial understanding of how he will deal with social interactions later on in part 2, which he encounters. In this video, we will discuss the underground man's interaction with a soldier he meets in a tavern. Before the interaction with the soldier, part 2 narrates the events that occurred when the underground man was 24. At 24, the underground man began his career in a civil service job, and during this time, he already began to show signs of depression and being antisocial with his coworkers. He believed that the coworkers looked at him with signs of disgust, and he often felt inferior to them. He alienated himself from them and felt overly conscious of how different he was from everyone else. Sometimes he would grow indifferent to his problems and would try to become close to his coworkers, and it was only then that he described his low self-esteem to romanticism and how much he was emphasizing his thought and feeling to his emotions. One night, the underground man is walking around town and sees someone thrown out of a tavern window during a fight. Being 24 years old, feeling the need for some sort of external stimulation to deal with all of the problems that he's facing within himself, this brought a desire within the underground man to pick a fight with someone. He enters the tavern, stands by a billiards table, and is quickly shoved away by an officer, barely recognizing his existence. The underground man wanted to fight the officer, despite not being afraid of his physical presence. However, the underground man lacked the moral courage to challenge him in a fight. The insult the underground man faced against the police officer not recognizing his existence built resentment within the underground man, and this prompted him to develop resentment over years' time. He wanted to return to the tavern and challenge the officer again to a fight, but lacked the moral courage to do so. A few years after the insult, he composed a letter to duel the officer, however, never had the courage to send it to him. The underground man devised a plan to gain revenge, following the officer and tracking his movement along a main street in Saint Petersburg. He noticed the behavior of the officer. The officer would often step aside for people of higher rank, but would walk indifferently past people less ranked, forcing them to move out of his way. To get revenge, the underground man created a plan to force the officer to step aside for him, that way noticing his existence. And in order to do so, the underground man had to show that he was of higher status. And so he begged to get an advance salary, and he borrowed money, and with that money he purchased a beaver fur coat in which he believed that the officer would notice and show him respect when he was walking past him. He dressed himself in the expensive coat and made his way over to the main street where the officer would often walk. He walked past the officer, and each time he would walk past him, the officer would walk through him and the underground man would have to step aside. And this interaction impacted the underground man as he felt like he wasn't able to get the revenge that he wanted, which was the officer to notice his existence. One day, unexpectedly, the officer was near him and the underground man purposely bumped into him, and the officer pretended not to notice him, but the underground man knew better and did notice, in fact, that the officer noticed him. And from here, he felt that his revenge was served and went home feeling exhilarated. Part 2 of the novel has multiple themes that we can begin to analyze, and the most important theme we can look at here is the underground man's alienation from his coworkers and the rest of society. And this can be attributed to the extreme forms of romanticism that was happening in Russia during the mid-1800s, often emphasizing one's emotions and a sense of individuality. And this extreme form of individualism is often to the point where one is able to exist outside of themselves. Despite attachment to one's emotions and individuality, the underground man shows the human need to be recognized. Being a young man at the age of 24, his lack of moral courage to stand up for himself puts him in a state of resentment against the officer. The resentment isn't even related to what the officer has done, rather, of the officer not recognizing his existence. We see that acts of revenge are often to fill voids we have in our lives. Though the underground man wasn't afraid of being physically or emotionally hurt by the officer, it was his desire to be recognized that prompted his revenge.